Diversity versus Decolonization, an honest conversation in Technicolour, or how to avoid doing a Robert Lepage. I want to introduce our intrepid panel here. Immediately to my left is Andrea Lowen, who is currently at Pacific Theatre, but has recently been accepted a position as Managing Director with Presentation House in North Vancouver. I won't do the bios for everyone because you have it on your sheet, but I just wanted to mention that because it's pretty recent news. Next to her is Omari Newton. And Omari's left, we have Margot Kane. Next to Margot, we have Brenda Ledley. Sean Isodi. And Catherine Shaw. So we're going to jump in right away. Robert Lepage. For those of you who don't know, he's a playwright, actor, film director, stage director of opera and theater to Cirque du Soleil. He worked with Peter Gabriel on his Secret World Tour. He's white, he's gay, he's a Quebecer. He's celebrating his 61st birthday on December 12th, which happens to be my mother's birthday, although she's not 61. And he has a multidisciplinary production company called Ex Machina. It's well known for both the theater and film productions of The Far Side of the Moon, Needles and Opium, Polygraph, and Possible Worlds. And he's also famous for The Seven Streams of River Ota, Dragon's Trilogy, and Zulu Time. So I'm going to start with asking Omari to give us a little bit of a background on Lepage's production earlier this year in February at the Montreal Jazz Festival called Slave.
So my hometown is Montreal, Quebec, Canada. It is still part of Canada. It is a mythical place where blackface still happens in the theater, and I'm not being facetious. There are companies that still do this. The culture, the understanding around issues of diversity is a little different there. And this is the context in which Canadian theater icon Robert Lepage thought it was a good idea to collaborate with, is it Betty Boniface? Betty Boniface. Betty Boniface, who was an Oscar-nominated Quebec artist. I think she did music on Les Tripes de Belleville.
Sorry, Oscar? Grammy?
I think Oscar. She did a film. Oh. Yeah, she's kind of a big deal. Which makes this so much worse.
She's white.
She's also white, right? They thought it was a really dope idea to make a large production inspired by Negro spirituals called SLAV, which translates to slave, and have a predominantly white cast on stage with stereotypically slavish, American slavish looks, head wraps. There were scenes depicting them picking cotton. There was tons of outrage in the city of Montreal. A lot of people protested outside in the theater. So it's not like they can say they were unaware that people were upset about this. They were unapologetic about what they were doing, to say the least. As a matter of fact, it took our ancestors to shut it down because Miss Boniface unfortunately twisted an ankle during production, right? Unfortunately, I don't wish pain on anyone, but our ancestors had to step in. And at which point they ended up, they first suspended the production and then admitted that due to the pressure from the public, they straight up shut the production down. Now, we can applaud for that. They shut it down, which is good, right? It's important to understand, too, that this production got a coveted spot at the Montreal International Jazz Festival, which is a very big deal. They got funding from all levels of government, provincial and federal, to do this. And Robert Lepage was unapologetic after the show was shut down, and in fact, released statements basically saying that he was oppressed, and he felt like it was very repressive, and they were stifling his artistic expression by having the audacity to demand that black people are in a show about Negro spirituals. Right. Have I covered the Gong Show?
Just to be clear, so there were 7 cast members. They were all women,
Right.
and only 2 of them were black. And the lead was Betty Bonifaci.
Yes. Yeah. I'm trying to think, have I missed any relevant details, or is that...
I think one of the things I think that struck me was that they were going to keep pushing ahead with the shows, except that Moses Sumner, who is an African-American jazz musician who was playing at the jazz festival, decided to pull out in protest. And he wrote a very amazing open letter stating why it was impossible for him to perform when SLAV was happening. And because he pulled out, then the international press picked it up.
And a number of American blogs and papers ran this story, and they were horrified. Like, so there was a blog I read called Two Smart Brothers who were literally laughing. They were like, "You're not going to believe what's happening in Canada," right? And Quebec, like, they have no idea. They have no idea what the outrage was. They think this is totally legit. And then, Margot will get into this a bit later, but hot on the heels of the cancellation of SLAV came KANATA, which was a show that dealt with Indigenous people in Canada that did not involve any Indigenous people.
And with that, I'd like you to hand over the mic to Margot.
It's like a racism relay.
So Margot, maybe you would like to give us a little more background on KANATA, because you had some personal involvement in that.
Yes, I did. The thing about the whole thing was that I've kind of seen Robert Lepage from a distance because of his work in Quebec and his reputation, of course. I've seen a couple of things of his, and my fellows in Quebec, one of the oldest actually Indigenous theatre company in North America, Francophone, is in Montreal, and Yves Siwoudran is the Wendat artistic director. They've been around like 30-some years, and he had worked with Robert on a number of things, and one of them was a very old piece, and I'm not going to remember these details, so you can research if you like, but worked on a piece that I saw then at the NAC. So when SFU's Michael Bouchard called me, it was because he knew that we had a history, because we're a partner with SFU, and he said, well, I have proposed, since Théâtre des Soleils is coming in with Robert Lepage's team, all the players, like 50 people, coming into the downtown east side, they want to do some research. I've put your name forward to speak to the group, and it's going to be over a couple of days. So that's when I received some information about the work, and he was going to do a 2-part. He was going to raise this incredible money for a 2-part epic kind of story about KANATA, about the Indians. And he was going to use that piece that he developed, or he worked with Yves Siwoudran many, many years ago, in the early 90s, I think it was, that this very old piece, a historical piece about an actor who had come to, Edward had come to Montreal and wanted to got to know the Mohawks in the territory, and had quite a little career in Canada. So I think he came from England. And so he was going to revive that piece and then do another piece based on the downtown east side. So I listened for a couple of days, and when it came my turn to speak...
Just for clarification, Margot, this was how long ago?
2016.
So a couple of years ago.
Yeah, a couple of years ago. So they came in for a few days, and they saw a few people. We saw a cop who had worked with the police in the downtown east side and had left the police force feeling really, really just disenfranchised with the police work. They met with, there was a woman, a beautiful Aboriginal woman with her eagle feather in her hand, weeping and sharing and opening our hearts to the story of herself down on the downtown east side and the many years of recovery that she'd gone through. I mean, it was really, they did an extensive they toured the Insight injection sites. They met with any number of other people that I don't know the full story. So when it was my turn, I was the last person, and basically I just said, so who in this room is Indigenous? And there were none. There were a number of people from a variety of cultures. I mean, it's a multicultural cast. And they pled their case to me. Everybody pled their case to me. And but I said but whose eyes are you going to see this story? Who's going to direct and show this story? We're all collaborating. We're all directing. And I said, Robert, you are the director. It's going to come ultimately through what you think you'd like. You're the director in this, and there is. And where is the story? And we're really tired of people telling our stories for us. It's just enough. Like, leave us some space now. Thank you very much. Don't help us anymore by thinking you know what we are going through. And the other fact is, we have a voice. And we're struggling and striving. I'm working 26 years to have my company because I cannot. No one will listen to me. And you say, I'm sorry, like there comes a time when we just have to say, no, let's try it another way. Try it another way. And when I look at this, it says, understanding the past, imagining the future. My feeling in everything that came up with Robert was that he didn't imagine, he doesn't imagine us in his future in the way that we imagine ourselves as self-determined peoples that have our stories to share. Step aside, please. You've had all the resources, you've had a wealth of time and resources, and you do marvelous work, but I think you need to rethink when this many people are telling you that you don't have the voice of the people in these stories. How can you possibly? And for me, that's ignorance. It's a kind of ignorance that comes when, it comes in a variety of ways. So I might only say, and for a number of reasons, but I will only say that when this came to light that they were going to do this, the Francophone Indigenous artists rose up and wrote this letter, and I was in a big residency for 2 weeks in July, and I was just starting, and all of a sudden I had to be on the email, and I texted Kevin Loring at the National Arts Centre, and I said, please write this letter. We need to support the Indigenous Francophone artists because they're going to face off with Robert. And so we wrote a letter, and we went on Facebook, and everybody was like clamoring. And it was a great outpouring of conversations about different perspectives, but it was really great, and I enjoyed it. I was happy that there was some. Obviously there are lots of things, there's a backlash, or there would be, and now I think now what's happening is Robert is still going to direct it, but he's not going to take a fee, and she's still going to produce it in Paris. And the show was it was stopped here because a couple of their producers pulled the money out. In the States.
So after the commotion, they couldn't take the bad press, and so the American producers pulled out, and so they said they were canceling it. But then about a month or so ago, they said they were going to go ahead with it. They made a big deal that Robert was going to be working for free, and that it was still going to go ahead with its Paris premiere in December. So, they did meet with the Indigenous Francophone artists.
They did meet, and I think they've met a couple of times. I think they met, Robert met with Kevin subsequently, and Kevin said it was like Nowheresville. It went nowhere. And I thought, well, it's okay. We'll get through this. We've all come together. We know we have people that are understanding the issues, and we know that we have a ways to go. I mean, there's lots of ways that, there's lots of other examples of things that are happening in our smaller regional areas as well, where we're just finding the language to help other people understand and speak up for our own gang that sometimes can't. They're in a difficult position. So I think it's been a rallying call. So hooray! Thank you.
Okay, so My first question was, can I get a vote on the panel who thinks slave and is an example of cultural appropriation? And what about KANATA? Just to be clear, because some people get confused about what cultural appropriation is. So why is it cultural appropriation? What makes it cultural appropriation? Who wants to take, let's talk about slave first, or SLAV.
To me, the line between cultural appropriation and cultural homage, appropriation is when you take someone else's culture without their involvement or real input, and you're profiting off of, and there are ways to profit that aren't financially. Like not taking a fee, it's still getting you prestige and international press, right? When you're taking work from another culture and you're not listening to voices from that culture and you're speaking for those people, that is cultural appropriation, right? Versus an homage would be if you collaborate, if you basically take a back seat and you collaborate with artists from a specific culture and you let them lead the conversation and you leverage your various privilege, whether it's white privilege or male privilege, to get resources for those artists to be able to get a platform. That's how you truly collaborate with artists. You help elevate them. You don't lead the conversation.
So it's a question about who has the power?
It's a question of who has the power and just doing things with humility and curiosity.
Curiosity, that's, yeah. Okay. What about Robert Lepage's claim that his artistic freedom was being infringed upon? Who wants to take that one on?
I'll hop in here. I think that freedom of speech is one of those things where it sounds really, really great, but at the end of the day, especially when it comes to art, because art does dictate what the rest of society does in general, right? It's got a really, really big pace on what's going on around us, and it ends up setting a lot of things as well. And that goes for all of the arts. And I think when it comes to freedom of speech, especially because he's saying freedom of speech now, but before he was saying that it was an homage. So which one is it, right? Because he's switching stories now is the biggest thing that I get out of that. And I often hear that about freedom of speech, you know? 1 minute we're talking about democracy, the next minute we're talking about, oh, well, you know, actually forget the democratic system, I want to be heard, right? And that happens in politics, but hopping back over to arts, it's like, if your objective is really to, you know, hear out these stories and to bring these stories to the people, right, to the rest of the audiences that you've already got listening to you, then why would you simply be turning to freedom of speech as a way of saying, oh, well, we don't really have to listen to those people anymore, that we're promoting their stories and all that kind of stuff, but we don't actually have to hear them anymore because freedom of speech. It seems like a blanket term often enough of being able to simply push down anybody who doesn't agree with you, right? Or who wants to create an ongoing conversation about things.
But my question is, was his freedom of speech really infringed upon? Was his artistic freedom actually infringed upon?
I would say, I mean, technically, well, no, I'm not even gonna say technically. Freedom of speech doesn't mean that people have to listen to you. So he can still write his play and do whatever he wants to do, but he does not have the right to our money, our time, or any other artist or any platform. So yeah, he has his artistic freedom. He can sit at home and write his play, and he can act it by himself or whatever, but that doesn't give him the right to have an audience.
Right, freedom of speech is not freedom from criticism.
Certainly, yeah.
First, if anyone else wants to.
Anyone else to add to that?
I think that what Robert Lepage did was elitist. He's acting like an elitist. I mean, is it convening freedom of speech? Possibly, but it's more about the values of what he's doing and the fact that there is no understanding on his part of the bad rep he is giving artists, I think, is shameful. I think the only thing I'm just going to say this because I said it at the time. I think that there are those of us, many of us in the room, who will sit on Canada Council juries. And I think that we have to hold Robert Lepage and other Quebec artists accountable, because what I see at the Canada Council is that there's no accountability around equitable practices and indigeneity, and including Indigenous people in their work. There's very, very few pieces that are, acknowledging that unlevel playing field. And so I thought this was actually a great opportunity for the community to fight back when they sit on those Canada Council juries.
But then we're left with the question of who gets to sit on those juries.
Well, yeah. It also leads to another problem where he is such a massive artist that I would imagine a lot of people sitting on juries who see his name come across would be intimidated to deny this person money, which speaks again to systemic privilege, right? Because in a lot of ways, Robert Lepage has been this guy who's brought great honor and acclaim to our country. And no one's denying that from him, right? It's just a shame that he doesn't use all of his status to now open doors for others. It's crazy to me that somebody, it's like, first of all, why are you telling the story of SLAV in the first place? Who asked you to tell this story?
He has a history of doing this.
Oh, yeah.
This is not the first productions where he's been called out for this.
Sure.